Fear is one of the most common traits in anime, but it's almost never allowed to stay. Characters are scared until they're not. They're anxious until they power up. They're weak until the moment they become a man. And then when fear does stick around, it's usually treated like a joke. But Frieren does something quietly radical. It introduces a warrior who is afraid and actually never stops being afraid. And instead of fixing him, the story just treats that fear as normal. And that's rare in anime. Anime usually treats fear as something you grow out of. Stark never does. And that's the point. That's why Stark works as a character. Anime loves a very specific type of a fearful warrior. Not the kind who's quietly anxious, not the kind who hesitates but still acts. They like the kind whose fear is loud, exaggerated, and temporary. Most of the time, fear in anime isn't treated as a real emotional state. It's treated as a phase, something the character is meant to outgrow. Take Simon from Gurren Lagann. Simon starts as scared, insecure, unsure of himself. His fear is obvious, verbal, and constantly called out. But the entire narrative is pushing him towards one destination: confidence. Once Simon becomes a man, that fear is gone. It's replaced with certainty, conviction, and absolute belief. Fear is a stepping stone, not a companion. And once he grows, it disappears. That's the first version of the trope, loud fear, followed by sudden courage. Then there's a second, even more common version, fear as comedy. The biggest example of this is Zenitsu from Demon Slayer. He's terrified all the time, screaming, crying, begging, panicking. His fear is meant to be entertaining. It's the joke. And when it's time to be impressive, the show flips a switch. Zenitsu falls asleep, the fear turns off, and he becomes flawless, confident, untouchable, powerful. Fear is something he literally has to be unconscious to escape. And that's the second version of this trope that you always see. Comic relief followed by that power moment. But in both cases, the message is the same. Fear is a flaw. Fear is embarrassing. Fear is something that real heroes eventually have to shed. Once that character mans up, the fear either fades into the background or vanishes entirely. Courage in anime is usually framed as the absence of fear, not the ability to act alongside it. And that's really why Stark matters, because Frieren doesn't use fear as a phase, or a joke, or a switch to be turned off. It treats fear as something that stays, not something to be conquered, but to be carried. Most anime characters are afraid until their moment arrives, but Stark is afraid before, during, and after it. That's the first big difference. When Stark knows a fight is coming, he doesn't posture or hype himself up. He spirals. He hesitates. He thinks about everything that could go wrong. And even once the fight is over, the fear doesn't vanish. There's no relief arc where he suddenly realizes he was brave all along. That fear stays. And Frieren never frames this as something he needs to fix. Stark doesn't get confidence arcs in the traditional sense. There's no moment where fear is defeated. No big internal switch where doubt disappears and self-belief takes over. Instead, Stark improves in something much quieter: responsibility. He shows up even though he doesn't want to. He takes hits even though he's terrified. He acts not because he feels ready, but because someone has to. And that distinction matters, because in Frieren, fear is never played for laughs. Stark isn't screaming to undercut tension. He isn't a joke character who flips into competence when the music swells. His fear is treated seriously, as something heavy, lived in, and rational. The world is dangerous. He should be scared. What makes Stark compelling isn't that he overcomes fear, it's that fear never gets the final say. This becomes especially clear in the first episode of the new season. This episode strips away the party's usual safety net, because magic is suddenly unreliable. Frieren and Fern, the strongest figures in the group, are effectively neutralized due to this stone, and for the first time, Stark can't rely on overwhelming power being somewhere behind him. He knows that, and is visibly shaken by it. But when the situation demands action, Stark still steps forward. Not confidently, not heroically, but deliberately. He doesn't suddenly believe in himself. He doesn't discover hidden resolve. He just accepts that if he doesn't act, things will get worse. And that's that crucial point. Stark doesn't act after overcoming fear. He acts while afraid. And Frieren's really good at reframing courage in this scenario. It's not the absence of fear and it's not the emotional triumph. Courage isn't functional. It's about doing what needs to be done even when instinct tells you not to. And by letting Stark stay afraid consistently, visibly, honestly, this story gives him something most anime warriors never get: a sense of humanity. He doesn't feel like a power fantasy despite the background of the show. He feels like a person who keeps choosing responsibility over comfort. Which is why, quietly, Stark becomes one of Frieren's most grounded and believable warriors. Not despite his fear, but because of it. Stark doesn't become the kind of warrior he is by accident though. He's shaped by Eisen. And what makes Eisen important isn't just that he trains Stark, it's how he treats him. Eisen never mocks Stark for being afraid. He never tells him to toughen up, and he never frames fear as something embarrassing. In most fantasy stories, a mentor's role is to harden the student, to strip away doubt, replace hesitation with confidence, and turn fear into aggression. But Eisen does the opposite. He accepts Stark's fear as part of who he is. That acceptance changes everything. Eisen doesn't teach Stark that fear is weakness. He teaches him that avoidance is. Running from responsibility is the problem, not feeling scared while facing it. Fear becomes something you acknowledge, not something you deny. That distinction quietly rewrites what strength looks like. Stark isn't encouraged to be loud, dominant, or fearless. He isn't pushed towards bravado or flashy confidence. What Eisen trains him into instead is reliable. If something needs to be done, Stark does it. This is strength as responsibility, not performance. And that has huge implications for how Frieren handles masculinity and heroism as a whole. Most fantasy warriors prove themselves through certainty, through presence, through making everyone feel safe because they appear unshakable. But Stark never projects that kind of confidence. But when things fall apart, he holds the line. Eisen's philosophy allows Stark to exist without being corrected by the narrative. The story never tells him to be more assertive, or more confident, or more traditionally heroic. It tells him that showing up matters more than how he feels while doing it. That's why Stark doesn't need a transformation arc. He already embodies Eisen's definition of strength. Not fearlessness, not dominance, but the willingness to carry responsibility even when it's uncomfortable. And in a genre obsessed with loud heroes and clean victory, that kind of strength feels quietly radical. What ultimately separates Stark from most shonen or fantasy warriors isn't how he fights, it's what he wants. Stark doesn't chase glory. He doesn't dream of being remembered. He doesn't want to stand at the center of the story. He wants to survive. And more importantly, he wants other people to survive too. That motivation just changes everything. Anime courage is aspirational. Characters fight to prove something, to surpass limits, to become stronger than who they were yesterday. Fear exists to be conquered so that characters can move closer to an ideal version of themselves. But Stark isn't trying to become an ideal. He's trying to get through the situation in front of him. When he steps into danger, it's not because he believes in destiny or heroism, it's because someone else can't. Because running would leave people exposed. Because the cost of not acting feels worse than the fear of acting. That makes his courage functional, not aspirational. That's what makes him feel so human. Real people don't overcome fear once and for all. They learn to live alongside it. They make decisions while anxious. And they act without certainty. But they show up even when they would rather hide. Stark reflects that reality in a genre that usually avoids it. And in a series like Frieren Beyond Journey's End, that matters. Frieren isn't interested in loud victories or heroic posturing. He's interested in what remains after the moment passes, in the quiet choices people keep making long after that applause is gone. And Stark fits that world perfectly, not because he's fearless, but because fear never gets to decide for him.